Welcome to the Irish Pagan School podcast. Your hosts are authors and co-founders of the Irish Pagan School here in County Waterford, Ireland, Laura O'Brien and John O'Sullivan. Fáilte.
Are the Gaulish Celtic gods the same beings as the Tuath? Well, Dagdi Agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome, John O'Sullivan, Irish Pagan School. And this is the Kester question that was sent in to us a little while ago. And I thought it was worth exploring because I guess neat answer, not hard to say, no. The Gaulish gods are not the same beings as the Tuath, but you could be forgiven for having a misconstrued understanding or a confusion around this concept of Celtic deities or Celtic gods. And so the problem with Celtic gods really is that Celtic as a term is an academic term for the origins of countries that had similar linguistic structures. That's it. There is no Celtic race, there is no Celtic genetics, there is no Celtic DNA. Like Celtic as an expression is from an academic, as I said, it's literally the definition of it, was when academics were looking at the information, the knowledge, the history, the lore, the stories, the manuscripts of the various Western European countries, and the origins of those, they found that there were similar linguistic structures, and then they defined them as the Celtic languages, and that was the Celtic people or the peoples who spoke this similar branching language. And it's not the same language, but it has similar roots and origins. So, not to get full academic nerd on things, like we have to go back, linguistically speaking, to some of the very earliest kind of information that we have on it. And that's where we get into this concept of the two forms of Celtic language. There's P Celtic and Q Celtic based on their branching dissemination of how that language evolved. But both of them come from an Indo-European root. And so when we take the language of these Western European countries and trace it back, all of these information does go back to similar kind of roots, and this is where we get back to the origin of the species, the out of Africa kind of theory, and how humanity as a species, how Homo sapiens as a species began to move and change around the landscape of our country, of our world, sorry. But even there, it's only the best guess on information as it is at the moment, because further study has shown that Irish, specifically Old or Proto-Irish, has less in common with Indo-European root Celtic languages than it does with Finnish language, and Finnish language is completely not in any way connected to this Celtic P or Celtic Q kind of language format. And so this is where things get really kind of odd when we look at this concept of Celtic nations. Like there were no Celtic nations. Like there was Gaul, there was Germania, there was, the Britons, but even then Britain was Brittany in France, which is a section of Gaul. And then, within the island that is now known as the UK, there was the Saxons, the Normans in the north, there was the Scots, there was the Picts, there was all of these different tribal peoples, and each of them had their own cultural expression and linguistic expression in many ways. And it's only as we have come more towards our modern history that we've had, to be honest, conquest, colonization, and domineering control of other cultures and other tribal lands, which forces the shift or forces the change in communication. If we want to take it into Irish history specifically, even within my father's lifetime, he would be beaten for using Irish in school. He was in school with the Christian Brothers because it was, again, we're not exactly a secular country here, in the post UK domination. And the only body that had enough power, influence, and money in order to provide education was the Catholic Church. And they were happy to do that, because it allowed them to force their own narratives on everything in our country. Different rant, different time. Back on the Celtic gods conversation. So the Gaulish gods and the Germanian gods and all of the Spanish gods are not the same as the Irish gods. And this is where we need to get into understanding how people's expression of deity alters and shifts based on the culture, based on the language, based on the landscape in which they grow. And it's understandable that there would be confusion. Let's be fair. As far back as Julius fucking Caesar, in his conquest out of the Roman Empire, conquering the Western European countries, he documented the variety of different deities and that were expressed in Gaul and in these other kind of countries that he came to. But even there, he went out of his way to try and rationalize the pantheons, the deities against what he understood as the primary gods of his world. And so that's where we get this concept of Dispater, Dispater, which is this sky father or father figure, father deity. And he would then equate other cultures' religious figures and deities back to his own pantheon. And so that's where we end up with confusion, like Lu of the Irish gods being referred to as a sun-faced god, and then he's obviously connected with the sun, which means he's actually Apollo, and it's people's misunderstanding of deity. Whereas for us here at the Irish Pagan School, we don't say that all deities are the one deity. It's a monotheistic approach to those kind of things, or it's it's a dumbing down of cultural expression and spiritual expression to try and unify it all back into this one concept and one expression of divinity or humanity, for example. Like we need to acknowledge that there is vast cultural differences with all of our people and all of the people all around the world, as much as for the most part we have 10 fingers, 10 toes. You know, two eyes, mouth, nose, ears. We are all genus Homo sapien. We are all of the species, but we speak different languages. We come from different cultures. We have different kind of skin tones, different ethnicities. All of these things need to be honored for and respected for their differences, even though we are all of us human. And this is where we get into this bother with the deities as well. The problem with referring to Celtic gods is that it's going back to this idea that all gods should be rationalized against a singular pantheon, or, just because there is a Welsh god by the name of Lugh, and he seems to be a many-skilled individual, is that then just Lu by another name? Or is there something different in the expression of deity that is actually happening here? We see it with the Dagda as well. One of the Dagda's names is the Allfather, which is the great or ample father. But people misconstrue that with the Allfather, which is a Norse name for Odin. They're not the same deity. They're not expressions of the same deity, but they are, archetypally speaking, similar. And that's where this understanding and confusion actually has its root. People look at this archetype of father, archetype of mother, archetype of warrior, archetype of any expression that we understand it, like, femininity or mother, any of these kind of things. And they seem to try and want that archetype to fit a particular form. And it is part of the culture expression, our own kind of subconscious language. We look for patterns, we look for things to seem the same or appear the same. So it's understandable. It's human nature to many cases. And, the expression of death in any kind of culture, we want to understand it. We need some way of rationalizing or approaching that. And that's where these concepts come from. And then when we apply those to deity and pantheons of deity, we like things that fit within structures, but not everything does. And that's where we end up with a lot of this confusion. Now, I know I'm probably seems like I'm rambling around it, but this is a problem. This is very much a problem when people come into the Irish Pagan School and we're talking specifically about Irish deities in the Irish lore, in our manuscripts, in our cultural tradition, in our literal landscape. There are places on this island that are named for these gods. Like the Hill of Uisneach, for example, is the seat of the Dagda's kingship. He didn't rule from Tara, he ruled from Uisneach. We have the Cave of the Cats, Upnagach, over in the Rathcroghan complex, which is the fit abode of the Morrigan. These places are still living within our landscape. And if you take the Dagda and just say, oh, well, obviously the Dagda is just a version of Odin expressed in a different way, or the Dagda is just Zeus or Jupiter because he's the sky daddy, he's not a sky father at all. And that's where we end up with the frustration, the real frustration when it's referred to as Celtic languages or Celtic gods. They are not the same. They may have similar traits, they may have similar kind of stories, there may be similar aspects to how people worship, interact, or engage with them, but they are not the same. Because if you try and make them all the same, you're ignoring facets of cultural expression that are unique to a particular people and unique to a particular landscape. And that is homogenizing everything and eradicating certain expressions of ethnicity, which really shouldn't be. And that's really the problem with referring to Celtic gods. I've done reading on it and trying to understand a lot of this. There's a Gaulish deity by the name of Succulus, and Succulus has this symbol of a wheel, and the wheel is supposed to turn the seasons when Succulus works the wheel. But the Dagda in the Irish mythology moves the seasons when he plays his harp, when he plays music for it. And so academics have tried to say, well, obviously this is the similar kind of thing, and this is the similar kind of responsibility or process as expressed in various cultures. So they probably come from the same root ethnicity. Difference is, Succulus is a hammer. And then they're like, okay, well, what other gods have a hammer? Well, Thor has a hammer, and Succulus is connected with weather. The Dagda has weather powers as well. So maybe Thor, Succulus, and the Dagda are all actually the same god. It's all a problem because you're ignoring the Gaulish expression of culture in their own way. You're trying to force in the narrative of hammer, and even Thor and his hammer is an entirely separate narrative to all of the information. I've read the Norse kind of stuff, and I need to be very clear to stay in my own lane. But the Dagd is not connected with the hammers. He's not god of hammers. If you want to look for a god, there's a smithing god in Ireland known as Grivnu. But Grivnu is not the same as Succulus, is not the same as Thor. Thor's not a blacksmithing god. So the problem with this Celtic gods, and are they the same as this or are they the same as that? I think I've already said it, and to try and rationalize it down to a definitive, so I'm not rambling all over it all over again. The problem with trying to force everything to conform to a singular box or singular expression is you're ignoring the variety and richness of unique cultural expression for where those deities are found. There are battle goddesses in a lot of cultures. There are death gods and goddesses in a lot of cultures. But I wouldn't turn around and say that that's the Morrigan in those other cultures, because the Morrigan is uniquely, specifically Irish. And that's really what we need to be aware of, because the globalization of our world is huge, and it is great in many ways because we are able to access more information. Our world is smaller to us because we can have the freedom to explore and the freedom to travel for the most part for some people on our planet. It's not everyone has the same freedoms, let's be honest. Everything is still very much broken, and some people are having their freedoms eradicated at the moment, but I won't sideline off onto that. I think it's important to understand that as we become a more unified global species and globally informed species, let's not completely destroy or forget the specifics of the spices of each culture, like their landscape, their stories, their art. Everyone points at Celtic knotwork art and the Latin style from France. It was very much happening all in Ireland. We have Neolithic art going back older than a lot of stuff on the literal stones of places like Newgrange, Nouth, and Douth, which show their drive, because it wasn't just, oh, I'll paint something or I'll use whatever. It is literally carved in the fucking stones of the landscape as an expression of art. And who knows, maybe there was spiritual elements to it as well, because why would a culture invest that much effort and energy in it? So if we start trying to homogenize everything, we lose facets of our understanding. We lose facets of the human condition as expressed through deity and divinity as well. So to go back to the question at the top end, absolutely not. The Gaulish gods are not the Tuatha. They are a different expression of deity based on a different culture, And it's not for me to talk about the Gaulish gods because I don't know them well enough, and I need to stay within my lane of the Irish deities. What I will say is, Gaurav Mahaga, thank you very, very much for the question. It's really well worth considering and well worth exploring. So thank you very much for the community member who asked that. I will also say, if you are looking for more information, go to irishpagan.school/free. We've over a year's worth of free resources available for you there to dive in and explore a lot of this. Watch another video here on YouTube or listen to another podcast if you're listening to it there. We have so much free information available because our purpose is to clear up misunderstandings and to allow people the freedom to explore things and to figure it out for themselves. Because it's not for me to say, yes, no, you're right, you're wrong, but I will give you more information and I will give you my perspective when it is looked for. So thank you very much. And until next time, look after yourself. Take care. Agus Slán. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a positive review in your podcast listener. Then head over to irishpaganschool.com and enroll in one of our free or paid courses. Slán go fóill, and we will see you next time.